Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to welcome a very exceptional panel here this morning. We'll be speaking about agriculture policy review. The panel is headed by Mr. Sartaj Aziz, who needs no introduction. In fact, all of our panelists are the persons of eminence, and I would be really unable to speak up for them. We have Sayyid Akmal Hussain, Dr. Nadeem Ul Haq, Dr. Pervez Amir, and Dr. Mubarak Ali on the panel. We have a young pair of keynote speakers, Dr. Ijaz Qureshi, who works in Canberra, and he is associated with the Australian National University. Dr. Asif Kamran, who has until recently worked at Center for Advanced Studies as policy chair. He is currently working as agriculture economist at NIAB, Faisalabad. I would like to, just share one slide, what I call as a wish list of agriculture policy, that we have a wish list in the form of making sure that our lands and water are productive, that we are climate resilient, that since 1988 report of Sartaji Sahab, we have been talking about diversification. And for last 20 years, our yields are nearly stagnant, excepting corn and potato. We continue to face major post-harvest losses and market manipulations. In the rural landscape, there is massive disparity and gender imbalance. At national level, we are faced with about 40% serious malnutrition. So these are some of the big questions which we continue to face, and policy prescriptions for them. We will like to hear from the distinguished panel here today, and I will basically taking notes. Just to have it started, I will request Sayyid Akmal Hussain to set the stage, and that will be followed by presentation by Asif Kamran and then Ijaz Qureshi Sahab. After their presentations, we will open the floor for discussion by the discussants and our panelists. So may I request Sayyid Akmal Hussain to get started.
Thank you, Dr. Iqrar Ahmed Khan Sahib, for your introduction and identification of clearly the 7 key issues in agriculture. And these come together in a new conception of agriculture policy. What I would like to do in the next few minutes is to indicate that what we need is a major shift in the strategy of agriculture growth that we have adopted since the last, I would say, 7 decades. Our agriculture growth strategy over the last 70 years has been essentially an elite farmer strategy. We focused on the rich farmers. Their yields have now run out of steam, as you've indicated. Yields have been stagnating for the last few years. And I think the greatest potential now lies in the medium and small farm sector, whose potential for yield increase exists and has not been utilized so far. By this sector, I mean farms below 25 acres. And more than 90% of the total number of farms fall into this category. And these medium and small farmers constitute more than 60% of the farm area. So this is a huge sector whose potential has lain dormant over almost 70 years. Now, what I would suggest in terms of this strategic shift in agriculture policy is to now focus on the medium and small farm sector as the leading edge of agriculture growth and indeed of agriculture diversification. How do we go? What would be the major elements of such a growth strategy? The principal sort of proposition or concept underlying this shift is that we need to move away from a growth based on inequality, which is what we've had, which is what we've had over the last 70 years, growth based on the richest farmers. We need now to move towards a growth strategy that is based on the middle and lower classes in the rural sector. So in other words, growth would be driven by equality rather than inequality. This is a conceptual change in the whole attitude towards policy making in general, but this is particularly so in agriculture. We need to have a medium and small farmer growth strategy which is based on equality as opposed to inequality. Now, how do we go about doing that? I would suggest that there are 4 elements in it. The first, of course, is that we have to provide a land to the tiller. The government has over 3 million acres of state land, agricultural land, are lying unutilized and being put to various other non-productive uses. These need to be divided up amongst the current tenants in 5-acre packages, so that these tenants become landowners, and they will thereby acquire both the incentive as well as the capability to invest in yield increases. So that's the first step. If you do that, something like 55% of the tenancy problem will be solved. And the remaining 45% of the tenants can be given access over credit on the basis of which they can buy land. Okay, now, so that's the first part, the land to the tiller.
साउंड का मसला हो गया।
अकमल साहब का कनेक्शन ओके, should we move on? अगर अकमल साहब वापस आ जाते हैं, in the meantime आसिफ कामरान, आसिफ।
Yes sir, yes sir, I'm there, I'm here.
Okay, we can get him back. Why don't you get started, because you know we have limited time and we have very precious panel with us.
Hi.
May I start, sir? Hello.
Please start.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I will be discussing overview of agricultural issues and policies in Pakistan. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You're fine.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So my talk will comprise of outline of issues in Pakistan agriculture and review of past policies, some successes and some failures, and then review of current policies and economic planning. Besides, I will discuss policy and social science research issues for inclusive policies and way forward. Sir, as many of you know much better than me, that Pakistani agricultural economy is facing stagnant and low yields. There's an issue of limited diversification. We have 5 crops over more than 90% of the area. We have low and one of the lowest water productivity in the world for our crops. And we have a high cost of production, low profitability, and degraded natural resource base because of the current practices. And our agriculture is not nutrition sensitive. So we are producing a lot of carbohydrates. with the precious natural resources. If we look back into the major policy interventions since 1960s, then there was high yielding varieties with international public goods from CIMMYT and IRRI, which resulted in green revolution. It was not only the high yielding varieties, but it was policy support in form of agricultural subsidies and price support that helped to achieve yield and high growth rate in agriculture. Besides this policy support, one of the major components was institutional development. There was a huge investment in R&D. There was agricultural development finance. ADF, Agricultural Development Finance Corporation, which then merged into Agricultural Development Bank of Pakistan. APCOM, Prices Commission was erected. PARC and Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission also entered into agricultural R&D. There was also huge investment in infrastructural development, mainly in irrigation in form of canals and tube wells. And there was huge investment in combating issues of waterlogging and salinity. So this whole major agricultural intervention from public sector resulted in increased use of inputs as well as expansion of cultivated area, which resulted in 3.6% average growth rate since 1960 to 65, and more than 6% annual growth rate of agriculture from 1965 to 70. Well, if we look at the success stories in Pakistan agriculture, we see that due to high yielding varieties, wheat and rice responded very well to the input package and the policy support. Later on, cotton and sugarcane also picked up with local R&D, basically local responding varieties, and sugarcane responded to the price support as well as protection, and the area expansion was happened. Maize was mainly private entrepreneurship to meet the local industrial needs, food needs. And then citrus expansion was mainly due to expansion in the export, and private sector invested in grading and quality for the export. And there was some support from USAID, ACIR, and other international agencies for the awareness of the farmers. Poultry sector was another exception, which initially was supported by government in 1960s in terms of tax exemptions and other support, which performed very well. If we look at rice and wheat, as I mentioned, then we started with very modest start of around 9 months per acre, but then with the high yielding varieties from CIMMYT and the subsidies and price support, it went as high as to 30 months. But then stagnation starts, which we will discuss later. Same happened with the rice. Cotton picked little bit late. It was mainly NIAB 78 where I work. I'm sitting. I'm proud to say that the responding variety to the inputs NIAB 78 picked up national yield, and it started with around 2-3 months per acre, but then it went to of length, but then it went to as high as 15 months per acre. Sugarcane, as I mentioned, that it was mainly due to protection and the price support, that there's not much in the yield, but it is mainly the area which expanded due to government support. So as mentioned, that maize, it was private investment in late 1990s and 2000, and the local demand, which attracted business interest and private investment, and the appropriate high yielding hybrid varieties, which resulted in area expansion as well as yield expansion. Citrus was due to export interest, and yield is more or less fluctuating all the time, but there was a huge area expansion in citrus due to export earnings. And as I mentioned, that poultry is an expansion with high growth rates, as the data shows that since it is even before 1980s, that due to government support, poultry, there's a high rate of return and high growth rate in poultry, and it is still at rise. But beside these success stories in the green revolution, there were also some failure stories. We had only five crops and stagnation, but the pulses and the oil seeds could not pick up. It was mainly because there was not international agriculture research support for the pulses, and we could not develop any indigenous high yielding varieties, and we only focused the pulses in marginal environment, and we could not divert it to the mainstream agriculture. And there was definitely there was no price support from the government for the pulses as well. So if you look at the scenario of gram yield, then there's no expansion in the yield, and we are still, around 5 months, 6 months per acre. Similarly, if I give example of oil seeds, you can see that the area has either decreased, and there is no potential, there's no increase in yield of the oil seeds, and majority of the oil is imported in Pakistan. So after these, the Green Revolution and that era, and after post 18th Amendment, there was another demand from the sector to have sector-specific policies. As a result, National Food Security Policy and provincial agricultural policies in all provinces, except I think Balochistan has yet to announce, were announced. But if you look into those policies, implementation plan and what will be the cost estimates to achieve those plans are still missing. It is a huge wish list where food security policy is also more or less like agricultural policy, and provinces have also provided everything, put everything in the policy, but there is no implementation plan. Similarly, there is no plan that how we can achieve the lowest hanging fruits and what will be the cost per unit of the investment to achieve those low hanging fruits. And there is a lack of linkage between national food security policy and provincial agricultural policies, which need to be tapped. So if we, and at the same time, when there were national food security policy and provincial policies, there was also a lot of policies on water, climate change, disaster management, and all other related sectors. But when we see that recently we faced havoc of locust and COVID-19, then we find that the policies could not achieve any significant results, and farmers suffered a lot. So it shows that there is a need for stronger intersectoral linkages, which were exposed during these crises. Similarly, the linkage of sectoral policies with macroeconomic policies, like exchange rate policies and trade policies, is also missing. And as a result, sometimes farmers suffer a lot due to these macroeconomic environment. Well, as we see that now, since last 2 decades, we have stagnation and low diversification. The one reason for this stagnation is that our innovation system is unable to break yield barriers. Similarly, after 1980s and in the 1990s, lack of policy support and farmers' capacity issues to achieve potential yields are one major issue. There was decline in the subsidies. It was replaced with price support first, but then price support also was confined to only wheat and to some extent sugarcane. So that has resulted in farmers' capacity deterioration. The infrastructure also got old. Irrigation systems are old, and then this deteriorating infrastructure is also one major reason for stagnation. We never worked on marketing system. We have extractive market institutions which are centuries old, but we are still working with that. And since even the agriculture was growing, major part of the profits and incentives was lost to the market infrastructure and market channels, and farmers get very less of that. And one major thing that withdrawal of policy support hurts small farmers more. When we make policies and we give incentives, it is the large farmers who always gain first and gain more. But withdrawal of policies hurts the small farmers more because of their issues of their saving and their other resource base. And it is not only the result of the agriculture sector policies, but it is also failure of economic planning that resulted in the stagnation and low diversification. So well-known fact that distortion of terms of trade against agriculture and rural economy. One study from PIDE that says that around $2 billion was lost to industrial sector from rural sector for over 20 years. So, and it kept going. So this is one of the reasons that we wanted to promote industry in the hope that once industry will be grown, then we will invest back into agriculture. But that reverse trend never happened, and as a result, the rural sector is in a very bad shape now. Dr. Mehboob ul Haq mentioned many of these economic planning failure issues, which include the growth without justice. we could not, we grew agriculture and we grew industry, but we could not collect taxes from those who benefited more from these sports. And we always have balance of payment issue. Whenever you ask government, then they say, okay, we don't have money for that. And as a result, R&D investment hurted very badly. And we are among the lowest in the region in terms of agricultural R&D to GDP ratio now. And we always face IMF programs and projects because we don't have, we always have balance of payment issue. And it is always said that it is donors' tyranny which makes us to withdraw subsidies and other things. But as many of the economists have already mentioned, it is part of that is it is donors' tyranny, and part of it is that we are unable to make proper plans or give the donors proper mechanism that how we will repay their money. And policy research and social research science in Pakistan is always very weak, which need to be promoted. So, Dr. Mahbubul Haq mentioned many of these economic planning failure issues in his book, The Poverty Curtain. And I think we are very used to of repeating those sins, and that is why we are still, failed to achieve growth. So one last thing which I want to mention is that social science and policy capacity issues in Pakistan, we have poor indigenous capacity in social science. That is a fact of life. But also, whatever capacity we have, there is lack of trust in available indigenous capacity. Whenever there is policy formulation or any plan formulation, then it is mainly to the donors or to other foreigners who are at the helm of affairs. And one major reason for, in terms of poor indigenous capacity, I would mention is that it is in social science and all other sciences that we have disciplinary research. We don't go for, we look at short-term gains, rigid boundaries between research programs and organizations, and we don't go for interdisciplinary research or transdisciplinary research. So one of the studies that shows that, we are more like, we have multidisciplinary so-called institutions, but they always work within their distribution, within their disciplines, and when the achievement, they achieve some goal, but the end user is after that. We don't consider end user ahead of that. What we are going to do will be used by whom it will be used. Similarly, it is the interdisciplinary research is very much lacking, if any. And then we have to focus on transdisciplinary research. We have to break these disciplinary boundaries, and we have to start working with the farmers or the end users, and then we have to have cross multiplication of the disciplines, and then we see that what the end user will get, and that will be more useful. Well, for way forward, as I mentioned, that Dr. Mahbubul Haq, Dr. Sartaj Aziz, and many other people have written a lot of things and had made very good analysis of our economy. Either we have to learn lessons from the past policies and their outcomes, how to correct the economic terms of trade, how to agricultural support and small farmer focus can be done. Besides this, or we can, many other countries have already progressed very well, so we can learn from others' experience and leapfrog. For leapfrogging, we also, if we look at where we stand, our agriculture stand, then the GDP share of 19% shows that it is same as in Denmark in 1930, or it is Germany when it was 1913, it has 23% of GDP share in economy. Or if we look at the agricultural labor force of 30–40%, then it is more like 1910 Denmark or Japan in 1935. So we stand there. So what we can learn from these countries, can we leapfrog and grow? The issue is that context matters a lot. There's a lot of complexity. Our condition says that our number of small farms increased from 50% to 63%. As Dr. Akmal Hussain already mentioned, that growth without justice may not give fruits. We already made that mistake in 1960s. And our farm area under small farmers have grew to 22%. It used to be around 11% in 1960s. So whether we want to leapfrog or we want to learn from our past mistakes, we have to consider these facts, and we should have to consider to the small farmers and the number is already growing. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Asif. Before we move on to next speaker, Sayyid Akmal Hussain had lost the connection. He's back, and I will request Dr. Saab to resume where he left. Dr. Akmal Hussain. Please unmute yourself.
I think Dr. Asif's last comment is a good point of connection between him and my talk as I resume the main features of it. As I said, we need to shift our agriculture growth strategy from one that was based on the elite farmers to one that's based on small farmers, medium and small farmers, less than 25 acres. So that it is through equality that we drive agriculture growth. Now, in order for us to do that, as I said, the first point is to provide land to the tiller so that they have both the incentive as well as the ability to invest in yield increases. But we also need an institutional mechanism that would provide them support on four key features. And the institutional mechanism that I have proposed is what I call the small farmer development corporations. These small farmer development corporations would be kind of social enterprises where the small farmers through government loans would have equity ownership of these corporations, but they would be run by professionals. So they would be owned by the middle and small farmers, but they would be run by high quality professionals. What are the services that they would provide to these medium and small farmers? The first, as I said, is land development, laser leveling for better water use efficiency, provision of new technologies such as drip farming, tunnel farming, and also the provision of credit through which they can invest in a broader range of crops than the ones that they are currently investing in. And then also provide them access over markets so that they can get better prices for their outputs. And they can get better quality inputs from the market. So the small farmer development corporations would provide these kinds of support mechanisms where these farmers can get better quality and cheaper inputs, as well as better prices for their finished outputs. So that's the crop sector. I think these measures would considerably accelerate crop sector growth. And as Dr. Asif mentioned, it will fill a gap in the deployment of research for agriculture growth. Because this support system, the Small Farmer Development Corporation, would be expected to mobilize the latest research to provide these services to the medium and small farmers. So it's a kind of channel through which high quality research can also be accessed by the smaller, medium and small farmers. Then, if you look at Pakistan's location in the map of Asia, you discover that we are at the hub of a milk deficit region, a crescent of milk deficit regions. We have milk deficit countries to our west, to our north and Central Asia, and to our east beyond India in Southeast Asia. And so we have a considerable potential in increasing the output of milk and in the export of milk to the surrounding areas. And these medium and small farmers could play the key role in exporting milk and milk products through support from the Small Farmer Development Corporations. In India, they set up, Dr. Kurian set up this Amul, which was a small farmers cooperative. It has now something like 7 million members, and of small women, poor women farmers. and it's the world's largest producer of milk and milk products and exporter of milk and milk products. So our medium and small farmers can also play this role this would diversify away from the crop sector, and the medium and small farmers could contribute to kind of export-led growth in the agriculture sector. And then finally, the further diversification would involve production and export of livestock and livestock-related products in this medium and small farm sector. So I'll end by saying that if we tap the potential of the medium and small farm sector, which is considerable, as I said, more than 60% of the farm area is being operated by farms less than 25 acres, and 93% of the total number of farmers fall into this category. We can massively increase not just the output of crop sector, not just crop sector growth, but also enable a kind of diversification which would lead to an export-led growth in the agriculture sector. And these processes would be powered by the enterprise and hard work of precisely that class of farmers that have been ignored for the last 70 years. I think I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Small farmer is the key word now. Every time we sit down and talk, let's see if we can come up with some magic bullet to solve this problem. Before I request Ijaz Qureshi to take up the floor, I would like to announce that we have with us Dr. Gu Wenling. He's Agriculture Commissioner at the Chinese Embassy in Islamabad. We also have with us Dr. Yusuf Zafar, former Chairman, Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, and Vice Chancellor Muhammad Nawaz Sharif, University of Agriculture, Multan. So I will be requesting them to say a few words once we have the discussion being wound up. Okay, so Ijaz Qureshi Saab, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ronak Rar Saab. Thank you for the invite, and it's pleasure to present and give my humble contribution here. So I would like to share my slide, if I could.
You can share the screen.
Is it coming now?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah.
The lower bar with share screen. If you press that,
you can start talking.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, what I thought it would have been useful, but I mean, I'll try somehow. It wasn't working, but if I could, that would be useful. So what I thought, my focus of the presentation is actually what sort of the policies have been there. And I mean, we heard quite a number of policies were there. The question is that whether we want to move from the subsistence farming to more kind of profitable farming. And that's kind of its question. It's important to consider the small farmers, and it's very important because they are the key backbone of the economy, and they are very important for the agriculture sector. But I think it's important to see what are the issues. I mean, we already heard some of things. This is just, I mean, recapping some of the things like share of agriculture and GDP is about 20%. It was, I mean, around 40% early in 60s. Livelihoods of about half of the country's population, employing approximately 24 million people. And foreign earnings, we know it's like a 38% of total export earnings, and rural non-farm income contributed between 40 to 57% of total rural household income. It's just pity I could not somehow connect this. I mean, if you could give me a minute, I could try again and see whether I can could share, or Dr. Asif, if you you're in a position to share my presentation I sent to you. If not, I'll just continue with this presentation.
Ji, Graisal, carry on.
Oh, okay, yep. So basically what I was sharing here, the sector-wise share in the national GDP at factor cost. And again, we know that how much the contribution of agriculture sector, I mean, if you're looking, the total is going down. The next thing is actually that if we look the total factor productivity, again, it has gone down. So that means that some things need to be done. And the question is whether we continue, I mean, what are the key challenges for the agriculture sector? This graph that I could not share, this was like the country products progress in reducing hunger index. I mean, that's what is like how much the country has reduced the hunger. And it was comparison actually basically with other countries. And from like a 10 to 20 years where the other countries were and where the country is now. And this one, I mean, the graph again, it's pity I could not share where, I mean, I was comparing Pakistan with Vietnam. In terms of food security index, this is the IFPRI work and others as well produce these figures that the Vietnam had a lot of hunger at one stage. But now in the last 10, 20 years, they have reduced in almost across the country. I mean, of course, the food safety is another issue, but they have reduced the hunger from the country. So what are the challenges? I mean, the sector development issues. I mean, Dr. Asif mentioned earlier, the stagnant crop yield, declining investment, poor quality and inputs, underperformance on agriculture inputs and output. Those markets are inefficient markets, high pre and post-harvest losses and lack of international competitiveness, low crop diversification and highly skewed distribution of farm size and low economy of size and scale. And the last thing is inadequate supply of water and inefficient use of water. This, the graph, which basically it shows that the poverty rates and how agriculture GDP per worker, when it increases and how the poverty goes down. So that there is a very strong linkage. If we could reduce some, I mean, increase the agriculture GDP, that reduces the poverty. And some of the work was done from colleagues in China and other parts, was like the number of persons removed from poverty for a given public investment and how much, and agriculture research and development, and clearly shows the benefits and how it actually affects income and poverty reduction. This one is like, I mean, again, it's an effect of 1% increase in yield and number of people living on less than $1 per dollar. And again, it's comparison percentage in one day poverty and how actually it reduces in number in per day poverty in millions. This figure I show, it's more about like how much the research and development spending actually the different countries have. And again, in the Pakistan, we know that the yield is low, but research contributes significantly, agriculture research and development, and of course the extension. So the key issue, I mean, I'll be talking more about the markets and how they play, I mean, major role. Some of the work through my own, I mean, program when I was with the ACR, one piece of work was actually looking how efficient the marketing system is in Pakistan. And some of the analysis was done by Dr. Ehsan Rana, was a part of that team, actually looked at how the difficulties actually the farmers face, but also the markets and the infrastructure. And he presents a very comprehensive kind of, I mean, analysis and the findings that unless things change, it's very difficult. Same project actually also looked at the efficiency of the system, or what we call the inefficiency, and who gets how much actually. These intermediaries, the markets are there for both farmers as well as consumers, but also those they're working in between those, the artis, you know, and unless they have that benefit, it would be difficult. So that requires that we need to improve the marketing structure. The same project, I I can provide the references. Professor Hong from China, he was part of that project. So basically, he showed that in China, the reforms took place slowly, gradually, and eventually the market was won. One key thing, across China was that the infrastructure was developed, and as far as the toll and the taxes were concerned, there were little or no those such tolls, and the farmer was able to take their produce from point A to point B without incurring significant costs. So the state of agriculture produce in the markets in Punjab, according to Dr. Ahsan Rana, is that these markets are, they are a messy and crowded place. Farmer-consumer interaction is mediated by several middlemen, each of whom claims his pound of flesh. On average, only 15–20% of persons bringing their produce to these markets are farmers. They are largely unable to achieve their twin objective of, one is facilitating farmers in disposing of their produce in competitive environment, and two, facilitating the consumer in purchasing agricultural produce. Again, this, I wanted to share this graph with Pakistan's share in agriculture in China's total imports. We know that the CPEC is a major thing for Pakistan, and this project actually looked at how much is actually the Pakistan's share in China's total import of fruits and vegetables. And what they are finding is that it's minuscule, very little compared to how much actually the China imports. It's in billions of dollars, and Pakistan's contribution is very, when we talk about even less than 1% or something, it's not that much. The next thing is actually the reforms in China. Basically, they took place in, before early 2000s. China's gradual and sequenced market reforms in agriculture, 1978, early 2000. First was the horticulture, the middle 1980s, then aquaculture, minor coarse grains, livestock, sugar and edible oils, and strategic importance like the cotton, soybean, rice, wheat. So again, different. It's kind of like the time period is like when different these commodities, the sectors were actually reformed. And the period be liberalized, over there is like the middle of, the cotton was the middle of 1990s, soybean the middle of 1990s, and rice, wheat, maize, early 1990s, nearly liberalized, and 1995, 90, and again, it's recontrolled. So again, it depends on the government policies, but many of those commodities were, the market reforms took place. So the rising of the wholesale market, it was like, when we talk about in percentage, it's very, from very small money, we talk about 80s, and now in like a 2000s, it's huge growth in terms of the food processing, and the growth rate is more than 10%. Rising of food processing farms, the processing is dominated by small and medium enterprises. So this was the comparative work done, the project recently completed, where they actually looked, what are because we thought that, yes, Australia is, can present something good lessons, but the China, which was a developing country, and how the reforms took place and what lessons are there, and it presents very good a picture of that and what can be done. So how they changed actually, and the consolidation took place, the specialization happened, and is still happening, and the key link between the farm and the markets and how they established that. So 4 major driving forces actually, according to Professor Jikun Hong, the work in China was that the first was the institutional reforms, second was the policies, technology change, the market reforms, and investment in agriculture. So improved efficiency of resource allocation, because the markets, if they're functioning well, both investors and consumers and the producers, there is a kind of interest there for everyone, because I mean, eventually we are reducing the losses, and the producer gets share and the consumer eventually gets share. It facilitates agriculture structural change, and in case of China, for example, it helped farmers cheaper input prices and higher output prices. Enhancing price discoveries, I mean, some of the same piece of work actually was done in Kunri, in Sindh, where they showed actually that how these, the specialization and approach directly from farmers to, I mean, those markets, how that can help the farmers as well as the consumers. The other area is more about the water management. That's the project, the water institutions, another project which was done, and comparing actually the water institutional the reforms took place in 2 states in India and 2 provinces in Pakistan. And again, the project shows, I mean, it was centralized irrigation system, decentralized because of the participatory irrigation management, but there is a little incentive for those to continue and be part of the reforms. And there are some vested interest as well. Other area is actually the loan, the farmers, especially those small farmers. And this project actually looked the access to credit by women farmers. And it was in Punjab and Sindh. And again, that project shows that, I mean, some of the small farmers and those women, and in case of Sindh, some of the minority farmers, it was difficult for them to actually access to credit. So these are the key things, ingredients for any, I mean, if we talk about the productivity. So I'll leave this one here. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Qureshi. The keywords from Dr. Qureshi's presentation are the market. That's the market which is failing us. I remember in Punjab, 2 major initiatives were undertaken. One was the reforming of cattle markets, and the other was establishment of what they call as Punjab Agriculture Marketing Authority. I hope that they are evolving and we see some results of those initiatives. Okay, so after these keynote speeches, we now move into the discussion phase. Asif Kamran actually mentioned that one of the reasons for stagnation is lack of innovation. There is a program by the title of Smart Agriculture in Punjab, which is World Bank funded. And Smart Agriculture has written a report on the innovation systems, which we will be discussing in a separate webinar. But today we have the author of that report with us, Dr. Mubarak Ali. Dr. Mubarak, briefly, please enter your opinion in the today's discussion, and we will of course have a separate webinar on innovation to take it up in extended form. So Dr. Mubarak Ali. Huh? Please unmute yourself. Lots of unmute yourself. Huh? You are not. You are still not muted. Please unmute yourself.
I can't start.
Please. Yeah, now you are audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. This is Dr. Mubarak Ali. I was ex-member Planning Commission of Pakistan. I also headed Punjab Agriculture Research Board in Lahore for a couple of years. Okay, I think I'm rather than knowing what should be in the agriculture policy, I'm more interested in a mechanism by which we can take these proposals to the policymaker and let it be implemented. I think that's a major gap, because as a member of planning commissions, I was very excited when Pakistan Seed Act was being approved. I thought it will dramatically change the seed sector, bring the quality. I mean, we were lobbying with the Prime Minister office, we were lobbying with the food security ministries, PRC, and other ministries, and finally it was approved, and nothing happened, nothing changed. Then I was very excited when the agriculture policy was being approved in 2018. I mean, I was part of the team. It was presented by the PRC. A lot of work was done, but after that, nothing has changed. So I think whatever has said, even in one of the very high-level meeting, Dr. Sartaj Aziz was complaining that he has produced 2 reports on food security, but none of its recommendation, or very few of its recommendation, has been adopted. So I think we have to think about most of the things as said today. I think we all agree on those, terms of trade, on technologies, and markets, institutional reforms, and everything. But then why we are not able to convince our policymakers to take up those suggestions? So I think we have to think about a mechanism by which appropriate policies is being adopted, is being prepared, and then it's adopted by the policymaker. Perhaps chartered of agriculture development or chartered on agriculture policy is required, which is accepted by all the political parties across the board, so that even if a government change, the policy does not change. I feel there is a dramatic change in the policy once even a sector level changes happen. I remember in 2007 and 2008, when there was a wheat crisis, everything, every loans, every policy aspect was moving towards increasing the wheat productivity. Then in 2010, the sector changes, new sector came, he said, no, I wanted to put more emphasis on the value chain development, or on the high value crops. So I think once this policy is adopted at the political levels, then everybody, include at least at the sector and minister level, at the DG levels, at the chairman PRC level, they should be evaluated how effectively they have implemented those policies. So I think now, because policy is there, it's not being adopted, nobody cares what sector did to implement that policy, nobody cares what minister did to implement that policy, and across the other stakeholders along the line. So I think my most important thing is to develop a mechanism to bring the policy and bring the changes in the policies, so that it is adopted at the political level and it's implemented by the politicians. That's one point. So I think more important, rather than on the content of the policy, more importance should be on developing a mechanism by which we can bring these changes in the system. As far as on the content of the policy is concerned, I think most important element I feel missing in all these presentations, or at least not clearly mentioned in some presentation, there is a vague point towards that. But I think most important aspect is the value chain development of agriculture. Even if you produce more through technologies, but if it is not being utilized properly, it's not being exported or processed, the system is choked up. The prices goes down, farmers get discouraged and things like that. I think here, we did talk about the export-oriented growth in agriculture, but what is happening is I analyzed 23 major agriculture commodities that's being exported currently. That was 2018. I found out that not even a single commodity except sugar, where we can fetch higher or even equal prices than the average export prices of the world. What is it telling? It's clearly telling that the quality of our commodities being exported is low, so we are not able to get the even average prices, average export prices. So there should be in the policy, there should be a lot of emphasis actually on developing and improving the value chain of agricultural commodities. I think I saw the Punjab agriculture policy, I saw the national agriculture policy. There is very little mention. Most of the policies we are talking about is directed towards increased productions and increased farm production, and very little emphasis on the value chain development of the agriculture commodity. And I believe unless we do that, unless we improve our quality, unless we improve, adopt the SOPs for the quality, we cannot really export of agriculture commodities. More interestingly is when we compare the farm gate prices with the international average farm gate prices in the world, we found out our farm gate prices are lower, mostly lower than the international average farm gate prices, which means at the farm level, we have the competitiveness, but we cannot export because the quality is not meeting the requirements. And so we cannot get the even average export prices. I think that's a very important aspect that need to be emphasized in the policy documents, that now the world is not moving from the farm production to the value chain or the quality production or the processed products. That's one aspect. And other is, I think people did mention about the total factor productivity. It's stagnant or declining actually. I recently found that in Sindh, the total factor productivity within 20 years is from 100 to 93. In Punjab, it's about stagnant, not really decreasing. But that means we have to change our emphasis. And surprisingly, when we compare that with the growth rate in agriculture, 2.5% or 2% or 2.5%, we did get increase in production. But I think the TFP is telling us that most of the increase in production is due to higher input use. When we compare the fertilizer use in Pakistan and India, when we compare the water use, when we compare the other inputs, I think they are better than India, even better than now in some part of the Indian Punjabs. So I thought in terms, what we are doing is pushing the growth in agriculture through pushing more input use, more water, more fertilizer and more chemicals and things, more machinery and things like that. We have to change our policy to drive the growth through technologies, where we can reduce or at least reduce the input use or get higher yield with the same level of input use. I think we should have to emphasize increasingly on that aspect. And I think, let me see some of my notes. I think for time being, small farmers emphasis, well, there's a recent work by IPRI who says that very small, in terms of productivity, not in terms of equity, if you are emphasizing on a very, very small farmers, less than 2 acres, then the productivity won't increase very much. But most productive part of our farming community is from 3 hectares to, from 3 acres to 25 acres. I think they wanted to emphasize on that part of the segment for increasing productivity in agriculture. We also found that major problems in the value chain development is the lack of capacity of the farmers. Actually, now we don't have to simply teach the farmers how to use modern varieties, how to use modern inputs, fertilizer and things like that, but also help them to develop the agriculture small businesses in rural areas. And we found the capacity is the serious issue there. We have to work with the small farmers, especially those who are unviable at the farming level, to develop the capacity to run those small businesses in the rural areas. I think that will really change the landscape of agriculture in rural areas by developing more agriculture business industry. By the way, when we are talking about agriculture business industry, we normally talk about establishing big milk plants in peri-urban areas, or big tomato plants in Karachi or things like that. But I think that won't change the agriculture. It's the small scale agriculture business enterprises which will really help to increase the, improve the income of the farmers. For example, we found out that, that all of the tomato puree used to make the tomato ketchup is being imported from China. And we were surprised to know, and when we calculated, we find out that the puree production can be much cheaper in Pakistan than in China, but then you have to follow the SOPs of safety and hygienic and things like that, which is a problem. So I think we need to train the farmers how to make the tomato purees, how to make the bran oils, how to make the olive oils and things like that. So I think there are in 33 commodities we analyzed, we found out about 50 opportunities of small, economically viable, small scale agriculture business opportunities are available in the rural areas. We need to support them in terms of providing the training for that, as well as providing them some credits and some incentives to take up those agriculture businesses in rural areas. So my I think main point is to bring the small scale agriculture businesses in rural areas. That will change the landscape of agriculture. Thank you very much. I may be a little longer, but that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Dr. Mubarak Saab. Okay, now Dr. Mubarak has actually thrown a very interesting point that in terms of farm gate price, our agriculture is still competitive. I was of the opinion probably we are not, but it's good to hear that our agriculture is at the farm gate price still attractive, being competitive. Would that be profitable? That's another question. Now we move on to our next panelist. I request Dr. Parvez Amir Saab to enlighten us. He has interest in agriculture in general and water in particular. Dr. Saab, over to you.
Unmuted. All right, you can hear me?
Sir, yes, you are audible.
Okay, I'm audible. First of all, let me make some corrections in the basic data. I think the two presentations and Dr. Akmal's comments were very cogent. They were very useful comments. Agriculture, as I look at it, it's basically $50 billion contribution to the overall GDP, about 320 billion, or 20%. Out of that 20%, crop agriculture is no longer important. I mean, we're giving all the emphasis, all the talk is primarily on the crop agriculture. Dr. Akmal alluded slightly to in the Indian-Korean experience. Out of that $50 billion or that 20%, 60% is now being contributed by livestock. That is your dominant sector. The shift from major crops and the minor crops coming in is really high. The minor crops have really taken up. That's also what's happening in the Indian Punjab and most of the Indian Rajasthan and other areas. So you need to be very careful when you try to generalize that, okay, agriculture, we want to bring more varieties, we want to do this, we want to do that. The other important element is that Pakistan agriculture there's no national agriculture policy. We don't even have a national agriculture ministry anymore. That subject is devolved. In your 7 points, which you, Dr. Ikrar, showed us earlier, I think put legislation there also. Very important. Legislation is a very important part of it. Agriculture is now basically a provincial subject, and so is water. I mean, I talk at several places, and this is the way we sort of look at it. In my opinion, the issue is really not productivity. The issue is management. What do you really want to do with agriculture? If it's a lost sister, and you're really not worried about her, then that 20% really doesn't matter. But if you want to look at in the broader macroeconomic framework that, oh, we had a textile which was very vibrant at one time, now Bangladesh is very vibrant. Do we want to bring that textile back in? Do we want to look at things in the post-COVID scenario. A lot of the countries are really going down. You know, they're having a lot of problem. India is having a lot of problem. Bangladesh is having problems. Do we want to pick up that slack in the manufacturing, the textile, the other areas? That requires a very different set of thought processes as opposed to looking at traditional historical policy, you know, what we did earlier 70 years back, where we stand now. I work a lot with farmers. I do a lot of practical farming myself. My view is that it's really not a productivity issue. And it's always, this is what we good economists sitting over on the table, we always make it as a productivity issue. It's really a question, the production question of what you want to produce, where you want to produce, how much you want to produce. And these questions are all answerable. If the government or the market sets that tone very clearly, farmers are extremely hardworking. They will give you whatever level of productivity you want. You give them the price and market. The real central issue for the small farmer as well as the large farmer, he is able to move around within that little bit with the RT. With the small farmer doesn't have that leeway. I think it's extremely important that you set that tone. The government has to get in with professional management. Yeah, the Kianusi type, the older way we used to do that, you have one section officer somewhere, or you have one director over there, or you have an extension department which has nothing to do with the farmer in general. He's never seen a farmer in his whole life, and you just try to sort of push things which you feel are good to the farmer. That doesn't work. The farmer is very frustrated, particularly this very recently with the wheat crop. My own hypothesis is that wheat crop will go down by 1/3. People are bringing in very quickly this canola is coming in very quickly. They're bringing in maize very quickly. They are looking more in terms of the dynamics of the livestock part. The straw is dear to them. The small farmer straw is extremely dear, whether it's rice straw or whether it's wheat straw. So that dynamic will shift towards livestock, where the price, you accumulate all your inputs, you wait for a year, either you can get your milk on a daily basis, or you can go to the market and sell it where it sells reasonably well, at least you recover your cost. That's not the case with wheat and some of the other crops. So crops to me are slightly on the wane. The government has to set its tone where it wants to sort of move on. Farm energy is another very, very big issue for the large farmer as well as for the small farmer. I think solar technology will come in very fast. It will not only be for pumping, it will also be coming in for taking care of overall farm energy. So the government, the people who are involved with that, they should look at that very carefully. This Chinese connection with CPEC and others, I think it's going to be extremely important. We know very well when the Chinese trucks come over here, what they bring and they will send through the port and what they want to take back. Where does Pakistan fit in? I don't think we have answered this question. We have a $46 billion from our friends from China, very big investment in Pakistan. We need to be very cautious about that investment. How is Pakistan going to be a part of that? It's not all. China is the nice thing about which Pakistan has this on the horizon is you have an indefinite market. We can sell whatever we want to sell. I mean, we don't need to bifurcate a market. We don't even need any other market. But you really have to produce to the specification, to the demands, to the desires, and to the level of quality which is expected by the Chinese consumer. And I think that type of partnership should come in as quickly as possible. We get in there, we sort of move fast, we develop some partnerships, we develop some institutional models by which we can look at that growth in the future. Personally, I feel that in your, a lot of the markets which Pakistan earlier was holding in the Middle East and other parts, they will now go to Israel. I look at it very carefully. I think you can look at a very big dynamic situation. The two technology relevant countries for Pakistan, Australia added to that, is China and Israel. Those technologies in agriculture, they are matchless, especially for dryland agriculture. So we will, that dynamic is coming in. That dynamic, as well as I pointed to Asif the other day, that it's also going to be this dynamic, this shift which brings into the small farmers is this locust. Locust is on the radar. It's a very big threat for Pakistan. I've seen the devastation it causes in Sindh. I've seen it in Baluchistan. I've seen it in Punjab, central Punjab, in Jhang and Mia, Chennu and some of the other areas. So these are on the emerging side. As you move on to your policy, I would say that please look at the substitutions for tea and for oilseed. You're talking about roughly $2.5 to $3 billion. You want to continue without tea in Pakistan, you can do that. There's no problem with it. If you want to make that import substitution, you want to go for high value, you want to jack up this $50 billion GDP economy of agriculture, you want to jack it up for $2 billion, that's one direction to take. The other one, just like India is following, is going to be with the canola. It is going to come whether the government wants it or not. It's going to take a lot of the wheat crop out. And I'm seeing that happening on each farm. I'm seeing it happening. The reason is simple. The water requirement is very less. The determinant is not the inputs which you put in. The determinant is not the hard work you only put in. The determinant in the end is water. How much water do you use to produce any given output? I think that's going to be the key source. We've been able to highlight that in the Supreme Court in this recent conference which was there. I highlighted very clearly that the future of this country is really on how it manages water, how it stores and regulates its water. So you got one Bhasha, you need Calabash, you need something, you need 200 structures on that. Without a clear strategy for water, forget about the small farmer. It's very easy to say that we want to bring in 13 million acres of government land and give it to everybody. Where is the water? Where is the water? We want to be very cautious on that. So I think these two things. I think the other point which you want to sort of keep in mind is youth. Nobody wants to stick to agriculture. Very unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Who is going to work in agriculture? The older hands, the hardworking hands, they're dying off. They are aging. We need to make sure that we keep the youth involved in agriculture. We sort of keep it interested in agriculture and we make it profitable enough so that they continue with agriculture. And lastly, the point which I'd like to raise is me and John Mellor did some work on this. My strong feeling for the policymakers and some of the key youngsters which are coming up, I don't want a $50 billion agriculture. I think the $350 billion agriculture is very possible. It's very, very possible. You jump it 5 to 7 times with the similar technology, just getting back in and managing it professionally. Right now, the only management we do is in the provincial centers, or we do it in Islamabad. We don't get down to macro and micro management where it really matters. If you can sort this out, agriculture can be the engine of growth. It is not the industry. The services sector, okay, it's not the industry. Which industry are we talking about? Unless you bring in strong agriculture output, whether it's in cotton or most of your industries in the sugarcane area, you building it in cotton, you get your textile moving. That's the way forward for Pakistan. So it's very important that the small farmer, the large farmer, everybody gets in there, and it should get a lead from the pricing and markets. Those are the two main significant sectors. You do that, you can move ahead. If you don't do that, call it goodbye. And I agree with Dr. Mubarak that yes, it's an agribusiness, but let's not make it as just a talk. What type of agribusiness are we talking about? What type of policy structure are we talking about which goes down deep into the farmer? Most of these subsidies, most of the monies which we put up, they are all eaten up at the higher level. Whether it's in the rice sector, you give 200 billion onto the rice sector, it's gobbled up right over there. It never sinks down to where it matters, or it matters to the small farmer. I leave you with these few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Very thought-provoking. So agriculture can be engine of growth if it moves from 50 to 350. So that should be the direction, and that should be our target and goal. I'll keep Dr. Nadeemul Haq to second last, and in between I would like to see comments from our distinguished guests in the audience. I will first ask Dr. Yusuf Zafar to give his comments on what he has heard so far. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for giving this opportunity. First of all, heartiest congratulations to two of our, participants, Dr. Rao Asif and Dr. Manzoor Manj, for getting the Civil Award this year in agriculture sector. I agree with what Dr. Mubarak has said, that a lot of policy framework has done in this country by national people like Shah Mahmood Qureshi Saab, Sartaj Aziz Sahab, and Iqrar Khan Saab by himself for Punjab government, and also Mubarak. But the point is always the implementation. Somehow, there is a huge gap between the implementation, like he mentioned, national food security policy. We spent 8 months, involved all the 4 provinces, everybody, in the all stakeholders, the international donors, the private sector, the milk sector, the textile, and we have many sessions in all 4 provinces. Very nice national food security policy developed in May. It was lacking. So any policy ingredients is never going to see the day of light, you know. So that is the number 1 issue. And we have seen even on all the bigger programs, like you mentioned in the beginning, for example, which simply forget those DLIs, disbursement linked indicators. There was a very strong 6-number DLI regarding the procurement of wheat in that sector, but we did reverse of that for certain reason. So I will end up, because many good speakers are there, I mean the panelists, that like we did, because I belong most of the time to the Pakistan Atomic Commission, despite the ban, despite the lack of international donors, despite the lack of supply of technology or infrastructure, we did the nuclear policy where all stakeholders, all political parties, the establishment, which they called the armed forces, they were all on same page. So we achieved, which was not possible, in nuclear technology. Similarly, if we have, like Dr. Mubarak, Parvez, Amir has said, that if there is a political will by all stakeholders to reform our agriculture sector, we have all the documents available, we have, the expertise available, unless and until the charter for agriculture development take place among across all political landscape, there is no hope. We have seen in the locust, tragedy, we have seen in the COVID tragedy that nothing works, and we have to rush for $200 million loan from World Bank and Asian Bank for locust control. But while in 1960 we have 20 planes, but now only 2 were functional in 2020, and among these 2, one was, and we lost the pilot and the engineer. So that is the state of affair at this moment. So the only my point emphasizes that the political will is required to improve our agriculture and among all the landscape in the political party and among all the establishment, that this is the real sector which needs their strong जो तवज्जो चाहिए उसकी, और उसमें lot of investment चाहिए. Among the IFRI report is that we have the lowest investment in R&D in agriculture. I presented this in Bani Gala, and Imran Khan Sahab, Prime Minister, asked which is the country which is lowest to us, and I said this is Bhutan. So the lowest investment even among the small SAARC countries. How we can expect agriculture to develop? So that is my and thanks for arranging such a nice seminar. Over to you, Tariq Khan Sahab.
Thank you, Dr. Yusuf Zafar. You have made very pertinent points, particularly the investment point. And we have to, keep asking for that. Let's hope that it starts happening. As Dr. Yusuf Zafar has mentioned, that this week we have 2 new celebrities in the agriculture sector who have received civil awards. So one of them is in the audience, Dr. Asif Ali. So may I ask you to make your award-winning speech on today's event. Asif. Asif Ali. Vice Chancellor Asif. Yeah. What happened? Probably Asif is checked out. And let's go to Dr. Manzoor Somro. Ji, Somro Sahab.
Sir, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ikrar Khan, and pleasure to see so many of great people here. I have had the honor of working with, great man, Dr. Amir Mohammed. And I think that was when I realized that when you develop policies, you take everybody, all the stakeholders on board. And I think what we have been talking, we have been listening so far, and somebody made a very pertinent comment that the policies are for the big farmers, whereas the number of small farmers are more. But since there are panelists, I will be very brief. And I just want to make 3 points. One of those has already been mentioned by Dr. Parvez Amir, which is engaging the youth of Pakistan, particularly the rural youth and those who are students at the agriculture universities or faculties, so that this farming is also encouraged, but turned more of a business rather than the old style farming. The other 2 points are the importance of technology today and the education of farming community. So education in not just the information, but the skills and use of technology, whereby that is also maintained, like some of the local tools that have been developed are by our very own local mistries, not necessarily engineers. So internalizing all those technologies and use, I think, should be part of the policy. And for implementation, the education plays a major role. I have been part and leading the integrated pest management through farmer field schools in Pakistan, particularly for cotton. And that's my personal experience, that it helps not only in profitable agriculture for the farmers, but also bringing people out of the poverty, the rural poverty, and that that's all published work that we have. So this is my humble submission. Thank you very much, and congratulations to Asif Khan if he's around. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm particularly, appreciative of your making mention of Dr. Mir Mohammed Saab. Most of us in the crowd here today are beneficiaries of his initiatives and work. We may have to do a separate event just to celebrate the work of Dr. Mir Mohammed. Okay,
I think we should do, Dr. Thank you.
Inshallah. Okay, I actually, when Parvez was introduced, I was a bit careful because Javed Iqbal never wanted to be introduced as son of Allama Iqbal because he thought that he is being minimized by mentioning his father's name. So Parvez Mir is in himself an entity. So I thought that we leave Dr. Mir Mohammed to a separate occasion. But you brought it up, and we are all grateful for that. Okay, any comments from the audience before I ask Dr. Nadeem Ul-Haq to give his take? Any comments? Rabia Sultan, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ikrar Saab. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to briefly talk about. As a farmer, I felt all these years that we've been talking of policy and policy implementation, and taking the opportunity that Sartaj Aziz Saab is sitting with us in this webinar. I think the 1988 report, the Agriculture Commission report that he produced, if even today we implement that report in spirit, in letter and spirits, I think a lot of agriculture issues will be resolved. Having said that, as a farmer, I feel that the successive governments have never been serious with agriculture. And the reason is that the 2.5% growth rate or 3% growth rate or 4% growth rate is a reflection of their seriousness and is a reflection of their mindset. There has never been an implementable long-term agriculture policy. It's just a knee-jerk reactionary policies. Whenever there are shortages, the government quickly responds and reacts. It's never an action oriented policy, it's a reactionary policy to some shortage or some crisis in the making or crisis that the government is going through. If you remember, and correctly, in 2016, we had a negative growth in the agriculture GDP because the cotton crop was did not it missed the target, and the agriculture GDP growth was a negative. Hence the government came up with a 300 and some odd billion agriculture package, and then there was as a result of that cotton shortage, the package came, and along with the package then there was this agriculture policy that you played a vital role in formulating the policy. Then the outcome of that was an agriculture commission, Punjab Agriculture Commission, with all the stakeholders. But unfortunately, 2 years have passed and the agriculture commission has kind of dismantled. So these are the issues that the government or the governments have to be very serious, and we have to have at least 5, 10, 15-year long-term, medium-term policy for agriculture. We cannot have these knee-jerk reactions. So these were my humble submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabia. You are talking about ownership or lack of ownership from the government side, which is same as our panelists have also mentioned, that lack of implementation. So implementation fails to take place because there is always political will missing. Any other comments? Any other hands raised?
Sir, it's a great initiative.
Yeah, Vakar, go ahead.
From your side, and you always played a greater role for the agriculture development in Pakistan. Hello?
Yeah, Vakar. Vakar,
Sir?
go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, in agriculture policy makings, and I appreciate a lot of leadership agriculture economics or the agribusiness is present over here. So in this case, role of universities is very important. Because universities are always there to develop a narrative, and in this case, if you are looking to engage the youth in agriculture or bringing back the youth to the agriculture, it is important that universities, in particular the agriculture university, should play their role so that you bring back the youth to the agriculture. And if you talk about the management schools role is very important for the development of agriculture and for the management of the farms, and also for the value chain development. And with your initiative, we had started a program on the agribusiness with the Sakhar IB University and with the Agriculture University. Such programs may be introduced in other countries, other schools, and also introduce the policy level studies in those schools. So those policy studies should not only interact with the policy makers, also with the masses. So if you connect the masses with the policymakers, you can bring the better results. And we had this experiment at Sakhar IB University, and now we are working with the dates market, and that is bringing a good results for the farmers and upbringing, and also we are engaging their kids in the management of the crops.
Dr. Kar, I'd like to make one or two very quick comments.
Yeah, Dr. Sir, go ahead. But let me quickly say that Vakar is Professor of Agriculture Economics at Sakhar IBA. And Vakar was basically responding to your comment that where is the youth for future who will be doing the farming. We started a few years back a 2+2 program in which the idea is to promote entrepreneurship in agriculture so that there could be a future default corporatization where youth starts taking interest in agriculture as a career opportunity. So, okay, please go ahead now, Dr.
Just very Three comments. One is on climate change. I think the major challenge which we are facing at the farm level, particularly these last two crop seasons with the wheat, with the gram crop, and I know even with parts of the area which is covered by the cotton crop, is climate change. The technology which is standardized pre-climate change technology, whether it's the variety, whether it's the dosage for fertilizer or whatever else, that needs a very quick revision. We don't want research for a long time. We want to borrow, pick it up, whatever you want to go ahead with. You have to come out and help the farmers. The government has to really lay this out. Secondly, what I'd like to request is that the fishery sector is very rapidly moving in Pakistan, Punjab particularly. We would like that to be enhanced. The input earlier was given about 15, 20 years back. I think Dr. Yaqub Bhatti led that effort. We need to sustain that. We really need to make a quantum jump in it. Lastly, my point is on this big tsunami, the government, the present government, giving this big push that we're putting this many number of trees. Those trees need to be around people. They need to be around farms. They need to be brought into urban agriculture or peri-urban agriculture. Put trees where human beings are. Don't put trees where people don't exist, whether that's in your 200 kilometers away into these some old desert or wherever you have some government. And no, we need the trees over with the people. The heat stress which this country is going to face, which we are already facing, I think that's going to become unbearable. So that policy shift, maybe Sartaj Deesab can comment on that. I think that's the direction which we should push the government to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Your three comments are well taken. On this climate change and our varietal landscape, we had a wheat webinar, and wheat is the biggest crop. And the revolution is that the Norrin 10 gene, because of which we had our green revolution of dwarf wheat varieties, is unfit for adaptation to climate change, particularly the heat stress. And the geneticists have come up with the new dwarfing genes. So there's a whole need of refurbishing our varieties, removing the Norrin 10 and coming up with stress-tolerant dwarfing genes. So this is true that what we are seeing every year in February, March, swings in temperature and wheat grain shriveled, and we are facing the same stagnation of wheat yields. Your trees comment as well as fisheries as emerging opportunity are absolutely appropriate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are overshooting our time limit of 90 minutes. So I'll now ask our very special panelist, the most vocal of policy and on the social media continuously 24/7. Dr. Nadeem Ulhaq needs no introduction, founding Vice Chancellor and current Vice Chancellor of PIDE, and he has been also the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission of Pakistan, among his other international engagements. Dr. Saab, you have heard agriculture people, and now we want to hear from you. Dr. Nadeem Ulhaq Saab.
Thank you, Ikrar Saab. I don't know whether I should be speaking here or not because I'm not an agriculturalist and I know very little about agriculture. My friend Akmal Hussain knows much more about it than I do. But let me just make 3 or 4 small points. One is that I think we have a huge expectation of government. Everybody says government should do this, government should do that. I'm surprised that people continue to say government should do this or government should do that. A government that is incapable of managing the power sector. We've had 6 trillion of losses in the power sector. You tell me that agriculture makes 50 billion, we lose about as much in energy losses due to mismanagement, poor policy, lack of professionalism. We lose 1.5 trillion in public sector enterprise losses. We lose about 200 to 300 billion rupees a year in our commodities program. You know that, where wheat is stocked and lost. And we pay the banks an extra 3% for buying that wheat. which is far higher than the private sector interest rate. So given that efficiency level of government, I'm still surprised there are local analysts and our local thinkers think that the government will produce something or that the government will listen or develop a policy. I've checked. The last agricultural policy that was prepared was by Sartaj Aziz in 1988. After that, there have been sporadic efforts, but really nothing has happened. Yes, IFPRI has made some reports, but I don't count IFPRI as the government of Pakistan. It is not the government of Pakistan. It is donors. They took $100 million to make a report. So big deal. What do I care? So first thing is, I don't know why we continue to harp on the government. My second point is that agriculture has been smothered by love. You know, when you have, all of us have kids, when you have a kid, you can spoil a kid with love. I think agriculture is the business that has been spoiled with love. There are too many agriculturalists in parliament. There are too many agriculturists in bureaucracy. When I go to speak at the Civil Service Academy, I asked how many people own land. Roughly half of them raised their hands. So agriculture is a business that has been spoiled by love. It began with us first giving it a tax-free status. Thereafter, we've been giving it price subsidies. We've been giving it cost advantages. We've been subsidizing imports, etc. So I think the agricultural sector has never really had an incentive to improve its productivity or choose the right crops. We still grow, despite what some professor said, that, you know, crops are declining, but crops are still very large, far larger than they should be. The adjustment has not been made because it's a sector that has been smothered by love, or political economy has favored it because, you know, we have not redrawn our constituencies. We still have a obsolete census that tells us that it's far more agriculture than there is. I mean, satellite imagery has shown that Pakistan is 70% urban. Our census refuses to accept it because the political, or whatever, the vested interest, the lobbies don't accept it. So I think, quite frankly, the biggest people, the lobby that hurts agriculture is the agriculturists themselves, because they are smothering it with love. They want too much. And obviously, they're destroying their own business like any other business that is spoiled by love. The third thing that I want to say, and that arises from the first 2 points, we need to get out of loving agriculture. We need to get out of giving agricultural special status. Agriculture needs to become a business. It needs to become a business. It is a business everywhere in the world. It needs to become a business. It has to have markets. Even today, for example, we set up a commodities market, but we set it up in Karachi. I never understood why we set it up in Karachi. Why was it not set up in Faisalabad or Lahore or Okada or Sargodha? We need agricultural forward markets like yesterday, like day before yesterday, like 1960s. We still can't set up an agricultural forward market. But leave the forward market. We still don't have a spot market. We still have market committees. We still have Chotu Ram's 1922 law. This has been debated since I was a child. I'm not a child anymore. I'm unfortunately an old man. And we are still debating whether we'll have an agricultural market or not. I mean, it's so bloody sad we can't have an agricultural market in a country where we love agriculture. I mean, this is amazing. The mandis are controlled by the DC, the market, you know that. I don't have to preach to you. There are no input markets. In fact, I would argue, I just recently taught a course in agricultural policy development in PID with a friend of mine from Singapore. Both of us are not agriculturalists, but we taught this because we thought we'd approach it differently. And the thing that surprised us, and we've got a number of people who've done a dissertation on this, there are no markets in agricultural, folks. If there are no markets, I don't understand what you're doing. And if you are just going to sit there and preach that, hey, please give us, you know, small farmers should do this, big farmers should do this, they should choose this crop, that crop. That is you and I talking here. We don't matter. I'm not an agriculturalist. Who the hell am I to tell business what to do? I remember Milton Friedman told me a long time ago, if you know how to make money, go make it. Don't sit here. The fact that you don't know how to make money is why you're sitting here. And I accepted that, and I know for a fact I can't make money. So I will not advise anybody what to grow, what to make, etc. What is needed is market. As Hayek said, Friedrich Hayek, all of you know, said that the market provides information. Without information, agriculture is drowning. And all we are doing is we are making hay and saying, hey, you should do this, you should do this. Hell, how do I know what agriculture should do? So what we need is markets. Please, agriculture needs to be a business. It needs to pay taxes. It needs to grow up. It cannot be a child anymore. We are keeping it as a 10-year-old child or a 5-year-old child. We need to let agriculture grow up. The fourth thing I'll say, which also derives from this, if you let agriculture grow up, I know Akmal, my friend, has a fascination for this. I think the era of small farmers is over. When you say China developed because Mao Zedong created a revolution. He wiped out everything in the past. We need to stop this small farmer revolution. The average farm size is now 2 acres, which is a joke. Chak Shahzad has houses that are 2.5 acres. How can we have 2-acre farms? You know, secondly, the big farms also need to come into the market. So the biggest problem right now I see is there's no land market. I know this fellow who runs TRG. He tried to establish a 500-acre farm and he gave up. He lost his money and gave up because he couldn't establish a farm. It's difficult to buy land. Why don't we have land markets? I'd like to ask you, why don't we develop land markets? Why can't I, if Bill Gates gives me the money, buy a $100 million farm and put in modern machinery? These days, if you look at, there's an agricultural documentary lying on YouTube, you'll see agricultural machinery is as complicated as an airline cockpit. We need mechanized farming. These small farmers, I'm sorry, will never be able to compete. No matter what we dream up in a webinar, these small farmers will not compete. So the labor needs to move from agriculture to the cities. In fact, it already has. It's just as a censor, and the spoiled agricultural lobby doesn't want to recognize it. All our servants sitting in Lahore, Karachi, etc., registers themselves in the rural area and the census, although they have lived here forever and they're never moving back. So the point is the labor migration has taken place, the land titling has not happened. These are obsolete things that need to move. So I think the biggest problem is the government doesn't know what it's doing. There is no research in the system. We are talking in a mechanical fashion about agriculture. We are not looking at the system as a whole. We need to make agriculture a business. We need to stop loving it to death. We need to tax it. We need to get it to recognize that it has to grow as a business, take its business decisions in the market. We need to have markets to make it work. And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadimullah. As usual, you have your philosophy and very well articulated presentation, 4 points. And you are an antithesis to Dr. Akmal Hussain. So let's see if we can find some middle road. Ladies and gentlemen, a very intense discussion, diverse opinion, interesting thoughts. But you must have heard by now that what was said in 1988 is still valid, accepting that at that time probably biotechnology was not on the landscape and water crisis was not as deep, climate change was not being recognized as a threat, and the world was not as connected as it is today thanks to internet. The mechanization was not recognized as anything beyond tractors. But Sartaj Aziz Saab has remained relevant. So we all are extremely honored that he is going to enlighten us and close the session with his remarks. Sir, over to you, Sartaj Aziz Saab. Yes, Sartaj Aziz Saab. Unmute हो गए सर अनम्यूट कर लें अपने आप सरताज जी सर अनम्यूट कर लें सर
सब बॉटम लेफ्ट कॉर्नर में एक बटन है उस पे
जी जी प्लीज सर यस यू आर ऑडिबल सर
अच्छा जी थैंक यू वेरी मच I think I must say it was a very, very interesting and comprehensive webinar, very useful presentation and many, many important points. But as pointed out by several speakers, our problem is implementation. We are very good in identifying what needs to be done, but who will do it, how it will be done, what are the institutional implications, is there any legislation required, what are the investment requirements, who will monitor the implementation. These are issues which are seldom addressed fully. So my suggestion would be that Dr. Ikrar with his colleagues should, from today's webinar, extract the key recommendations that emerge. And as Nadeem Ul Haq said, in my view, only 20% of those will be addressed to the government. The rest are addressed to other institutions or other stakeholders. and then make an effort to bring it to the attention of those who can contribute to their solutions. By way of example, I can list 5 or 6 priorities that appear to me from the discussion as important. The first is terms of trade for agriculture. As Asif Kamran pointed out, if the terms of trade are negative, then the farmers would not respond. In other words, the ratio of output prices to ratio of input prices. So the terms of trade depend not on just agriculture policy, they depend on exchange rate policy, they depend on the trade policy, they depend on the fiscal policy. So agriculture policies has to be looked at in this broader context in which we, the entire macroeconomic framework, is it favorable to agriculture or not? Now, for that purpose, in my report on food security in 2009, I had recommended that the Agriculture Policy Institute, the original Agriculture Prices Commission, should do a biannual analysis of the terms of trade of agriculture and submit to the ACC whether the terms of trade are becoming positive or negative. But that was never recommended. We have recommended a mathematical formula. So in my view, if they can't do it, PIDC or some other research institution, including provincial institution, can do the terms of trade and bring it through the media, the terms of trade deteriorating. For example, in the 90s, I remember from 90 to 2000, when the terms of trade were favorable, it improved from 100 to 125, 25% improvement, and the growth rate was over 4% in the 90s of agriculture. Then after 2000, they deteriorated, and the growth rate fell down to 2.5%. So it's a very important relationship, and that is something that the government has to do, to look at the input or output prices and see how we can, if the oil prices suddenly go up or electricity prices go up, it has an impact on agriculture. So something has to be done with the output prices. The other important area, in my view, is institutional. The key factor which many speakers have pointed out, we have very weak institutions. If you make a list of about 100 institutions which are serving agriculture, you can't list even 5 or 10 institutions which you can call first rate. Most of them are B or C or D minus. So if you look at research institutions, Asif Kamran listed the success stories, you will find that behind all those success stories, there was a fine research institution. Majid Kala Shah Kaku, Mahbub Ali for cotton, I think S.A. Qureshi for wheat. These were committed people. Single-handedly, they transformed the research in that area. Why can't we produce more people like this? So if this is addressed, and the worst today is cotton. We have the most important crop, and we have miserably failed in cotton research. So I think in terms of institutions, we have to address and see whether we can motivate researchers to do better. Similarly, a lot has been said about marketing institutions. That's a very big field, from cold chains to traditional marketing. So I think there also we have to go ahead and look at it. The third point I'll emphasize, as already been mentioned, is livestock, because it's bigger than the crop sector. And our productivity of livestock is very low because our feed is very poor quality and not adequate. And I think milk and meat have much greater demand. So if we want to move in the nutrition chain as well as in the marketing chain, we have to pay more attention to livestock. I think overall, the relationship with China under CPEC, they have now identified agriculture as a new area of cooperation, and separate committee has been set up. I think our institutional improvements can benefit a great deal in cooperation with China. They can boost some of the institution by coupling their own institution with our institution, so that can certainly help. And I think in the process, milk and meat and other exports to China can also take place. Finally, I think climate change and water and environmentally friendly policies is a very, very big area where, again, we are ill prepared today. I think we are, as already pointed out, our kilogram per water unit of water is 1/4 of Australia, 1/2 of South Asia. So we are very inefficient using of water, although, and with the climate change, we can't afford that. And I think last year, in 2018, a national water policy has been approved, which was signed by the Prime Minister and the 4 Chief Ministers on the 23rd of April 2018. And there is very urgent need to implement that policy to create efficiency, because we waste about 40% of the water which comes through the canal system. It seeps through and doesn't reach the farm. So there is a tremendous scope for drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, and on-farm water management to make better use. I mean, it's 4 dams of large size. If we can save even half of or 1/3 of the water that we lose, we'll get 15 million acre-feet of water. So I think these are the, I've just given as example of areas which can be identified and then addressed through the media, through social media, and through the approaches to policymaker, approaches to institutions, so that the webinar can achieve desired results. With these words, I again compliment you on a very good webinar.
Sir, thank you very much. We are extremely encouraged and honored with your comments, and I have taken notes of your 5 points, and while summarizing today's webinar, we will highlight your observations. With these submissions and contributions, ladies and gentlemen, I feel very satisfied that we had a good hour-and-a-half discussion, followed by very highly philosophical discussion, and we have take-home messages. We'll compile the report and share it with you. I would also like to mention here that we'll continue with these webinars, particularly about this climate change. We are going to discuss what can be done to the wheat crop, and about livestock. We have done one webinar on the genetics, and there are 2 webinars in the making, one on animal nutrition and one on fodder and fodder crops as an industry in the making. I'm also planning to do one more on livestock sector in terms of range management, because there's a lot of pastoral livestock, which is still a neglected segment, but it is probably the biggest segment in terms of livestock contribution to the economy. So with these future outlines and with your great contribution today, we close the session and look forward to your continued support. Thank you.